Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cutting the Grooves of History with your two sharp needles, Jack Stanley and Gavin Rice. In our first episode, we're going to introduce the show by talking about our broad variety of interests and where that will take us along our journey.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And thank you, Gavin. It's very nice to join you here. My name's Jack Stanley, and I fiddle with history and talk about history. And the interesting thing is this, that Gavin and I are at 45 degrees in so many different ways, including our age. And this is a fascinating thing when you think of history, because 45 degrees, 45 years definitely influences different understandings. And so this is going to make it a fascinating show because we have a wide and broad view of histories, many types.
It's very true.
And what we're going to do is look at these various types of histories, talk about them, perhaps argue a little bit over them. But the fascinating thing will be that it'll be a learning experience and something that we can share together.
Absolutely.
All
Jack.
yours, Gavin.
I agree. Now, I have a question for you, Jack. You are quite the aficionado on cylinder recordings of presidents. Would you like to get into on how you got into recording the presidents of the United States on wax cylinders? I'm very interested in you talking about that.
I was able to record President Gerald Ford on cylinder, which was pretty amazing when you think about it. To actually get a former president, to make a recording for you. One has to remember that many former presidents have made recordings, and I have looked at a lot of these recordings that they sell, and they will add recordings that are not correct. Like the recording of Grover Cleveland is not Grover Cleveland. And the recording of William McKinley, I'm sorry, is not William McKinley. I wish it was. Yeah. But the thing is that we have Taft, we have Roosevelt, and Gerald Ford on cylinder. It's kind of interesting. And one other thing just to mention, when we were doing this with the recording project, is that we played a recording of Theodore Roosevelt on cylinder. And the 26th president spoke to the 38th. I think that gives history no better boost or understanding because it allows us to see and understand how one period of time can transcend into another. It's really kind of amazing. That was something special to me.
Absolutely. I agree. That's such a fascinating experience to hear.
So Gavin, let me ask you.
Of course.
Tell me about people that influenced you, that excited you and started you on your journey of remarkable abilities so far. I mean, you've done more than I can shake a stick at.
Thank you, Jack. I remember my musical journey starting when I was very young, when I was about 7 or so years old. I've always been surrounded by music. My mother is a musician. Her father was a musician. Unfortunately, he passed away before I could have met him. But one thing we started to notice along my journey is how I could listen to very intricate details of music when I was at a young age, like very young, maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. So the first person I would like to thank, number one, is definitely my parents and my relatives that I grew up around, because they surrounded me with music that it was not the music that many young people my age were listening to at that time. This is music that was very, very detailed and intricate. It was a mix of like classical music, jazz, different types of folk music. That's very important.
Sure.
And I remember hearing an instrument that I never heard of when I was about 4 years old. And it was called a banjo. And lots of you know the banjo, of course. And I heard that, and I always thought that its sound was so fascinating. And, you know, this 2 or 3 or 4 year old, you never would have thought that he would have, thought a banjo would be the most interesting sound he ever heard. But I just loved the sound that it produced, with the
Probably was an
calfskin head.
amazingly fascinating sound for a 4-year-old to hear something quite like that ping
Yeah,
that
I
comes
know.
from a banjo.
A very percussive sound, yet
Yeah,
s you
yeah.
know, projective tone, which I really liked. So as time went on, um, I started listening to more and more instruments, and one that stood out to me above all was the violin. Um, I remember asking my mom when I was 7 years old, I said, "Mom, I would like to play an instrument, and I would really like to play the violin." And she said, "All right, sounds good." So we rented a violin, and that's when that was the official beginning of my musical journey. And I have to say, even still, this person still inspires me. My very first music teacher, Clayton March, we're still in touch.
Mhm.
He played the violin, the clarinet, the banjo, the mandolin, the saxophone, all of these. He had such a broad variety of odd instruments. He has a C melody saxophone. I remember seeing that when I was 7 years old, and I've never heard of that, so Clayton March was definitely one of my biggest inspirations.
That's
He
cool.
inspired me to be curious and think of other instruments to play besides the violin.
That's always the secret of everything, to
Mhm.
stay curious.
Yes, I agree, Jack. And after the mandolin, I picked up the banjo, which I was like, finally, I can play an instrument that I've always thought fascinating since age 3 or 4. Then to the bass, to the saxophone, to the piano, etc., etc. So Clayton March is definitely one of my main inspirations. As far as phonographs go, because I know that's what me and Jack Stanley have in common. We have lots of musical taste in common. We have lots of everything in common. We have lots and lots and lots and stuff in common. But as far as phonographs, I definitely want to say people like Jack Stanley have inspired me to use phonographs as a creative tool. Phonographs, especially Edison phonographs, are not only used to play back music of 100 years ago, they are creative tools
Mm,
for you.
agreed.
That, the introduction of the Edison home phonograph and the recorder, that was in 1898, as early as that.
Mhm.
That was like the most important thing that could have ever happened to sound production history. For the first time in history, a family could record their own cylinder within their own house.
Mhm.
And
Very
when,
important.
of course, very important. And when Jack Stanley, I met him at the Wayne Phonograph Show not too long ago. I've always watched his videos. Um, and when watching his videos, I noticed him talking about a lot of his machines. And he really, really went into depth about how they worked, their introduction, all these things. And it's fascinating to listen to. And that's what inspired me to use the phonograph as a creative tool, not just as a entertainment piece of equipment. So thank you, Jack Stanley, for that. Seriously.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
It's
I've
amazing
always
how
been,
things come back.
of course, yeah. I've always been interested in using it as a creative tool. I just wasn't exactly
Mhm.
sure how. So I got my first recorder and then experimented, and Jack Stanley helped me push forward in that. So I kept experimenting and experimenting, and I still am experimenting. So
Oh, never stop experimenting. It's
exactly.
always fun.
Yes.
The fun thing is when it blows up in your face, you learn something.
Oh yeah, when you're uncoiling the spring and it shoots out.
Yeah,
Yes. Um, I can think of a few more, but definitely Wyatt Marcus inspired me to.
yeah,
Um,
he's a fascinating man.
he is a very fascinating man. He inspired me to um, get interested in the mechanical aspects of the phonograph. And I've always been a very mechanical person. I before I even was into phonographs, I would restore instruments, very complex instruments such as the clarinet, saxophone, and
Mm,
I was always so into mechanics. I didn't tell you this, Jack, but when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I
mhm,
remember looking up online the principles of a vacuum engine,
mhm.
and I made one out of Legos.
Oh,
And
well,
so,
now let's move this along here.
yes.
And what are our interests? And for me, if I may say so, I am fascinated with ancient history. modern
Oh,
history, re, uh, political history, technological history, um, sound recording history. All of these various things fascinate me and interest me. And this is what I'm hoping, that we can talk about all of this. And also, as I mentioned before, we might look at things at a 45-degree angle opposite from each other.
exactly.
That's an important thing, because as I was telling Gavin before we started this, I said, you know something, we're two sharp needles, but I have had a few more revolutions than he's had. Therefore, I'm not quite as sharp, but he's incredibly sharp. We're starting on the record with Gavin, and I'm doing the refrain at this point.
Thank you, Jack. I was just rambling. I apologize. I like to ramble a lot and go into detail about my
Well,
influences, but
we're going to have chances to do that, but let's try to keep moving here and bounce around so
sure,
we don't put everybody to sleep. That's the important.
that's true. Now, Jack,
Yes,
what was your first cylinder recording ever?
I still have it, and it was called The Barn Dance with Len Spencer and Ada Jones. It was a 4-minute cylinder,
Wow.
and
You still
that
have
was
it.
my first.
Wow, that's
And
wonderful.
for some reason, I still have it.
That's wonderful. Now, follow-up question. What was the first homemade cylinder recording you ever made?
It was me speaking in 1979, 1980, and I didn't understand everything about cylinders yet. I was still fiddling with stuff, and I found that lighter fluid was really good at smoothing out cylinder. And so I made some very unique brown wax cylinders, and I tried recording my voice doing like Lincoln's Gettysburg Address or something.
Mhm.
That was the
Wow,
first. And then I
fascinating.
learned and honed my craft. Acoustic recording is not something that you set it up and do it. It doesn't work that way. It's
Mm-mm.
it has to be done on a daily basis, because every day everything changes. And that's the problematic part of acoustic recording, because I know traveling to different parts of the country and making recordings, all of a sudden the temperature is different. The
That's
the
true.
the atmosphere is different. The barometric pressure is different. All of this takes place when you try to make a recording,
Exactly.
as
Yeah, because
Gavin is
you're
learning as
essentially
well.
right, of course,
Huh?
and you're essentially recording onto a barometer. You're using a barometer to like record a cylinder, basically.
This is true. This is true. And the thing is that wax that's used, that whatever it, I forget what it's called. There's a name for it. I used to know it, but that wax, it's affected differently by temperature. It's affected differently by barometric pressure. It's amazing, as does the recording head. Every aspect of acoustic recording changes with the weather, and that's a fascinating thing. I remember going through Edison's notebooks, and he found a recording that was perfect. So he had all the chairs nailed into place and said every recording will be perfect. They used the same setup the next day. It was dreadful, and they
Mhm.
had to move the chairs around again. So it just didn't work that way. But I
Mhm.
found that fascinating, that Edison went through that much trouble trying to keep his recordings as perfect as possible, and
Yeah,
discovering that it's an impossibility.
absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Um, Now, me and Jack are both musically um, inclined. Now, I have a question for you, Jack. What
Sure.
is the earliest musical experience that you remember?
Well, my mother complained about it constantly. Whenever I would go to the barber shop to get a haircut, I had to sing a couple of songs and dance for the barbers first. And I did that every time, much to the annoyment of my mother and probably the barber, you know.
Right. Wow.
But I had to sing a song for them and I had to do a dance for them. Always.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And it's a strange thing. I don't know what it is. As early as I can remember, I was a vaudevillian.
I was just gonna say that.
It it's
Yeah.
it, it it's in my blood. As I said, before I even knew what vaudeville was, I was doing vaudeville for the barbershop.
Oh yes.
You
And
know, I was
now,
doing Give My
yeah,
Regards to Broadway and that kind of
into
stuff.
the dances, yeah, and the
Yeah.
choreography. That's wonderful. Speaking of barbers and barbershops,
Hmm.
it is known that you are quite the barbershop singer. Could you please go into your experience being in a male quartet?
Oh, I started doing that in 1973. And actually, how it happened, I was in high school and we found music by this company called Spebsqua. We didn't have the faintest idea what Spebsqua was. Later, we found out this is the Society for the Preservation and Encouragement of Barbershop Quartet Singing in America Incorporated. That was their name, which I think has changed now. But we pulled out this music, and there was four guys, and we said, "Let's try it," and we did, and it was pretty good. So, being hot shots and 17 years old, we found a chapter that was doing barbershop choruses and went and sang for them and ended up doing a thing on their show, which was kind of fun
Wow,
just
that's
to
cool.
begin. And then that ended. And I worked with lots of different groups. Probably the most significant was Win Place and Show.
Hmm.
We started as a barbershop quartet. Interesting little note. The Osmond Brothers started as a barbershop quartet.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes,
I
yes.
knew
I
their
keep forgetting about
trainer
that.
years ago. His name was Val Hicks. And Val Hicks was their coach, and he's the one that started them off. But for me, the most significant one was Win Place and Show. We
Hmm.
started as a barbershop quartet. We ended as something very, very different because we did jazz. We worked with bands. We did barbershop. We did Four Freshmen. We did all kinds of
Wow.
swing numbers, and we did lots of performances over about almost 9 years. We had an almost 9 year gig at the Meadowlands Raceway.
Hmm.
And it was fascinating. I mean, we were in like Flynn, so to say, so to speak. And
Absolutely.
we worked there sometimes 5, 6 times a night
Wow.
and doing shows and singing. And
Hmm.
plus we worked for the one of the hotel chains. We were doing the Summit Hotel chain,
Hmm.
and we were doing stuff, and also we were working for the Racing Authority, and we were working for the Gambling Commission. So
Yes.
we got to see all different sides of everything. So it was a fascinating journey.
Yeah,
Those are
and you
great
were at
guys.
Disney. It was Disney World or Disneyland. You were
Disney
working.
World. Yeah.
That's right. You were working there too.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, Jack. Fascinating.
So what about you in singing? What do you do?
I don't really sing too much. I did sing when I was in this Celtic group I was in. I
Uh-huh.
played. I
Uh-huh.
started playing that. My first major band was being in a Celtic folk music group.
Interesting.
Yeah, we actually recorded an album on Spotify under Celtic Roots. That's our name. Unfortunately, we had to, break up because we are all in college now. So we
Right,
had,
right. Yeah.
but as far as singing, I would do some background harmony in
Hmm.
that group. I multi-track male quartet standards and mix them all together so it sounds like one person.
That's
Um,
really cool. You know, something the technology today is so makes it pretty easy to do now.
Without a doubt.
Um,
Yeah.
what we used to do years ago, you'd take a metronome and then you'd try to sing one part and then you get to the next track and get the metronome going and try to sing. It was just a mess.
And now that was on 8-track tapes, probably back in that day, right?
Reel to reel,
Reel to reel, yes.
reel to reel, four track recording, and it was fantastic if you could do it, but there was a lot of fits and starts there. It's very hard to keep it, because with the new stuff you can kind of edit it to mix
You
it
can
all
move it around.
together. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. That's my singing experience,
Okay, cool.
but yeah,
And
I
that's great.
thank
The
you.
interesting thing is that singing is something that's so natural and everyone should do it, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And it's something I learned in a laboratory. I used to work for a while for Belcor, and I worked in
Oh,
their music and sound lab.
that's
And
right.
it's kind of a fascinating thing because they hooked me with electrodes and they would have me sing. And when you sing, your blood pressure goes down. So
That's
if you
right.
ever find yourself stressed or you find yourself in a nervous condition, sing.
That's
It
true.
helps.
It does. It
It's
really
good
does.
for you.
Yeah, and even, singing, humming, just your favorite tunes. It doesn't even have to be really in pitch or
Mhm.
in any
Doesn't
key. It's
matter.
just singing.
It's
It
for
helps.
you. It's for
Exactly.
your health.
Singing is good for you.
Yes.
That's right.
Singing is fundamental.
Singing is fundamental. I agree, Jack. Now,
So,
um,
so what do we want to do our first show on? After we introduce ourselves and talk about what we're interested in. What do you have interest in early ancient history?
I actually do.
Okay.
Ancient Greek and Roman history.
Okay.
I'm
Cool.
trying
Cool.
myself to learn ancient Greek. Because if you look at it compared to modern Greek, it's very, very, very different.
I'm sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and I actually have lots of fascination in linguistics.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I like to find the roots of languages and figure out how they all connect. And as far as ancient history, I really do like to investigate the languages and the music of ancient history. Um, Going back to Gregorian chants. That's not so much ancient,
Sure.
but
And obviously your interest in Celtic music. I mean, right there. When you think
oh
about
yeah,
that, that goes way, way, way back as
it
well.
does absolutely. Yeah, and actually, we one of the members had a if I remember correctly, one of the members had it's I believe I forget the name of it, but it's a Celtic horn that it's
Hmm.
very long and it has a horse's head at the end, and it has a
Okay.
partial series just like a trumpet or trombone, but it's like a war instrument, and
Yeah, I figure it sounds like something that's saying charge. We're going to attack or
exactly,
whatever.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, the
And scare
the
the daylights out of the enemy. Yes.
that was yes that and that was actually going back to ancient history that the music was actually used as a weapon a lot of the time, as you know.
Agreed. Yes. And you have to remember, as late as the Civil War, you had music in a military campaign.
Hmm.
If you even think of like Pickett's Charge, Gettysburg,
Hmm.
which was the last Napoleonic march in history,
Hmm. That's true.
they were playing music as they marched
Hmm.
to almost certain death.
Exactly. And now, Jack, speaking of that, are you aware of those Civil War era instruments with the bells facing backwards?
Oh yeah, yeah, fascinating
Yeah,
machines.
and that they did that because the military band would be at the front of the regiment, and the
They
backwards
wanted to
horns
play it
would,
for the okay.
yes, while they marched. So
Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, and even going like you were saying, just music is such an interesting aspect. It can be used for emotion. It can be
Hmm.
used for
Sure.
love. It can be used for, like I said, emotion like sadness, happiness, war,
Hmm. Or
funerals,
defeat.
defeat. Exactly. It's music, in my opinion, is one of the most broadest things that has ever come to this earth because it can be used and represent anything.
It is, if you think of it, a language.
Hmm. It
It is a
is absolutely.
language that can be shared by all races, all people, we we don't speak the same words, but we can understand the music. We can feel the music.
Exactly.
That's an important thing because music conveys, as you said,
Exactly.
emotion and
Right.
happiness, defeat, loss. Look at when the British surrendered at Yorktown. What music did they play? They played a piece of music called The World Turned Upside Down. You can't get more defeatist than that.
Of course. Of course. And I just lost my train of thought. Music is this is it. Music is one of those things that as us humans, not everyone can understand it like a language, but we can feel it and be impacted by it.
Sure, sure.
I believe it is like one of the only examples of a language that could do
I
that.
I think music I think music transcends most things. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a basic part of an element of who we are. In fact, I was having my heart checked recently, and I was watching the machine, and I was noticing as my heart worked, it played at a waltz tempo. And I was sitting there saying, we're such musical creatures, aren't we? Even our
Absolutely.
hearts do something in a very musical beat.
Hmm.
I was quite amazed by that waltz tempo of my heart. I don't know
Absolutely.
if everybody has it, but I'm definitely 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
that's
and
a
I agree.
fascinating thing. It's
It,
amazing.
oh, of course, absolutely.
And
Um,
technology has allowed us to see inside ourselves, hear ourselves.
True.
Um, and with music, technology, as you very well know, allows you to go to destinations that couldn't even be dreamt 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
I mean,
That's
just saying, I worked with early recording and I worked with what was called modern recording, and it's archaic
yes.
compared to what exists.
Hmm. Of course. And young people my age are still so fascinated at the principles of a phonograph. I remember, yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
it's rediscovered. Yeah,
Because someone my age, born in 2003, they were well past the years of having LPs as a source of music.
there's a curious thing about LPs. We were so happy to get rid of them, and then you got the CDs, and the CDs kind of died out, and then suddenly people are interested in what they call vinyls now.
Yeah,
Um,
vinyls.
I'm baffled by that. You know, it's back to crackle, 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 and music. Okay,
Yeah, 100%. And
because I'll tell you, real quick story.
go ahead.
The first time I ever heard a CD was at a party, and none of us had heard a CD record play, and we weren't paying that much attention. But they said, "You want to hear the Mamas and the Papas?" That's what the thing was. We said, "Sure, that's great. I'm going to put it on." And so we sat back, and all of a sudden the music started, and everybody jumped. There was no sound leading you to the music, which was something that you expected.
Yes.
And it only happened that one time because we were trained after that. But it was fascinating that first time the music started without a sound.
That's a very, very interesting point coming
So
from,
I know we're talking about lots of various things here and confusing a lot of people
without a
probably.
doubt.
But I think the important thing is that we are tripping a little bit and finding our way as we start this together, this journey, um, as we dig into history with our sharp needles here, which are very
Absolutely.
important. But the thing to remember is right now we're feeling our way, and I think it would be a wonderful thing also if you have ideas, thoughts, comments, let us know. Because
Please
you know
do.
something, sometimes if you mention something, it might be the most fascinating thing that we can sit and talk about and expand upon. That's
Absolutely.
important.
I agree.
So,
Yes, if anybody has any ideas, feel free to contact me or Jack Stanley. You can reach us on Facebook,
sure.
Messenger, anything works.
And
Um,
we're all over the place, like a bad penny, you know.
of course. Now, what do you say? I think we're probably good on time this first episode, or shall we expand a
Yes,
little more?
I think we've pretty well expressed ourselves and had a little fun doing it.
Absolutely.
And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that as we go along here, I think you're going to be fascinated with the many interesting and fascinating things that Gavin does, and some of the interesting and fascinating things I know.
Of course. I
And
can
I
vouch for
think
Jack.
I'm going to learn a lot here. Okay. You know, there's an old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's why this whole thing's set up. We're 45 degrees apart, but I think our needles vibrate in a similar tone.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree, Jack. I'm going to learn a lot from Jack as well. And hopefully, our audience can learn a little something too.
Sure.
I'd like to say thank you for checking in. This is Cutting the Grooves of History with two sharp needles, Jack Stanley and Gavin Rice. And we'll see you at the next show. Thank you very much.